So this morning I'm going to give a talk that I've titled, Vowing to Live the Buddha Way. And I chose this topic because we're going to be offering a precept ceremony this spring. And it's the first time that we have offered a precept ceremony here at Dharma Field in a few years. So I'm happy to be able to do that. And I thought I'd talk about it now to kind of let people know what's coming up and see if you might be interested in participating in it. The reason that we're doing this, that we're offering this precept ceremony, first of all, of course, it's been a number of years. But last year also, Steve Hagen offered a course in the precepts. And at the end of that course, some people had expressed interest in taking up the precepts. And we just didn't have anything set up at that time for people to be able to do that. So that's why we're doing it this spring. So before well, let me just say I want to start my talk, I guess, with one of the vows that we make every Sunday. For those of you who come every Sunday or who follow us online, you know in our chant book we have 4 bodhisattva vows. And the fourth of those vows is to live the Buddha way, though it is unsurpassable. And of the 4 vows, it's the one that is probably the least hard to be able to follow. Is the least hard is the one? Least easy to follow. I'll put it that way. There's something about the wording of it that just you kind of get caught a little bit. All of these vows have in them some degree of a sense of impossibility. Right? The first vow that we make is to save all sentient beings, though they are numberless. And you just hear that and you go, well, that just sounds impossible. And there's a degree to which all of the vows have that inflection, because it's really dependent on how it is we're looking at reality and whether or not that vow is something that we can do in each moment or whether it's something that's impossible to do. And this vow is no different from those other vows. So again, the vow is to live the Buddha way, though it is unsurpassable. The thing to note is that the Buddha way is not a particular way. In other words, there are not things where you go, well, when I do this, I'm a Buddhist, and when I don't do this, then I'm not a Buddhist. That's not how Buddhism works. There's not particular ways that it looks. So it doesn't mean that if you lose your composure in public, you're not a Buddhist anymore, right? So people think being a Buddhist might be just always being calm, maybe smiling in the face of calamity and pain. But that's not the Buddha way. The Buddha way is not any particular way. The Buddha way is simply just to fully live out this reality, to fully live out this experience. And in that way, it's unsurpassable. Because how can you be beyond that? How can you surpass that? How can you be outside of just fully living this moment? So then you get to the question, well, what does it mean to vow to do that if we're already fully living out reality? Because we can imagine that's what we're doing at every moment of our life. We're always living reality. How could it be any other way? What does it mean to vow to live out reality? I mean, it doesn't seem to make any sense. And I think one of the things we can look at is that word vow. So vow, that little word. It's a little word, but it has so much going on in it. When we think of a vow, we think of a promise to do something that we're not doing right now. Like, I vow to stop doing that, or I vow that from now on, I'm just going to be a nice person. Okay, I'm not a nice person right now, but I vow that I'm going to do that. And that's the way we normally think of vow. With Buddhism, vow is a bit different. Vow is actually in the Buddha Dharma, in the teachings of the awakened. It's pointing to what is taking place right now. It's a return to what is actually taking place right now. And I'm gonna risk being a bit confusing here for a second, but I want to say that that sense that we have, that vow is something we're not doing right now. So the sense that we have that when we're vowing to do something that's not taking place right now, especially as it relates to this particular vow, the bodhisattva vow that I'm talking about, which again is to live the Buddha way, though it is unsurpassable, that sense that the vow is is something we're not doing right now is actually a realization that something in the way we understand what's going on right now, our notions of what's going on right now is off. So when we go, oh, I vow to do this thing I'm not doing, what we're really doing at that moment is we're noticing that our sense about what it is that should be going on right now, and that word should, it's a little light that goes on. It tells you you've got some expectations, you've got some ideas about the way the world should be, the way it is. Well, it's this way, it should be this way. So when we have that sense that we should be doing something else, right there is awareness that the way we're constructing the world isn't right, that something is off about it. And that's what vow, when I talk about it in this Buddhist sense, we can help that it sees us, that our traditional way of seeing vow can help us to see that what it is that's taking place at that moment, which is that we're getting caught up in our ideas. Now, I'm going to put this a bit less abstractly for you, because again, I intentionally was getting right into the paradox of it. This usual sense we have of vow, of doing something we're not doing right now, and that confusion that we have right there is actually bringing us right back to what's actually taking place, which is our confusion about what it is that's taking place. So if we think less abstractly, what we do is we'll notice that something is off, something's not right in the world. And it could be our behavior. We could think, I shouldn't be doing that. That's wrong. Or we can, more often, it's other people's behavior. You look at that person and go, they shouldn't be doing that right now. So it's some sense that the world is off. And we might even see it as our understanding of the world is off. We might recognize that there's that dimension to it. And in that feeling, we might feel inadequate, like we're not good enough or we're not doing it right. We might feel alone and depressed. I saw a film last night that I don't know that I'll recommend anyone see. There were two people who walked out on it because it's so slow. The opening shots each are about 10 minutes apiece, and one of them is a guy looking out his window watching a rainstorm. And then the next 10 minutes is that same guy lying in a bathtub. So it takes its time. But one of the reasons it takes its time is that this is a movie it's about two people, and they're living completely alienated, isolated lives, just out of contact with anything else, feel totally alone. They don't seem to be living a life of joy. And then at some point, these two characters come together, and for the 20 minutes that they're together, the film is so alive. It is just so alive that it makes all the agony of the rest of the movie almost worth it. But you really have to have patience. But I say that because that is that sense we have of our understanding of the world. It can make us feel alone and depressed, and that can really weigh heavily on us. When we have a sense that something is off in the world, we can also see others suffering too. We can see that there's suffering in the world. Something's off. There's a craziness out there, right? And we sense that. We see that. We know that. Maybe we could see that it's in ourselves as well. And then usually, what do? Well, at that point, I'm wrong. I'm not doing this right. The world is crazy. We do something about it. Or we feel we should do something about it. There's that word should. We feel like we should do something about it. And if we don't do something about it, then we might feel bad about not doing something about it and think, oh, I should be doing something else at this point. That's what I'm talking about. All of that. You can see that in that. There's a recognition that something is not quite working out the way that we take it to be, the way we understand it to be. So our vow then is to really see what's taking place. And in that case, it's to see that the way that we construct the world, the things we expect from it, are off, that they don't match the world. And that should be a sign. It really is a sign. It's not the sign that the world should be the way you want it to be. It's, well, what's going on out there? What's really going on? Now what? right? Rather than going, hey, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be like this, right? And of course, when things are hard, it really feels that way. Like this is not supposed to be happening, at least not to me. Maybe it can happen to other people, but it shouldn't be happening to me. So our vow then is just to see what's really taking place, to see how our sense of what's really going on is a notion of what's really going on. It's not what's really going on. And then how we react out of those notions that we have about what's going on in the world, often unconsciously with more notions, with our own notions about what it is that we need to do. And that's our practice, is to see that's taking place. And note, this is not a judgment of that behavior. This is not saying that having notions about the world and then acting out of other further notions, that's bad. You know, there's not a judgment, just an observation. It's an awareness of what it is we're doing. That is the vow, to live the Buddha way, though it is unsurpassable. And taking up the precepts, the thing that I talked about at the beginning of my talk, taking up the precepts is the vow to live the Buddha way. So, what are the precepts? Well, that's a good question. That word was not a word I used very often before I came to Dharma Field. I would hear it go, precepts? What's a precept? You could tell what kind of a life I was leading. So, but what are the precepts? So when we hear that word, if it's a word we're familiar with, we might immediately think rules. So now we're talking about rules. And in fact, I just looked up the word precepts just to get a common sense definition of the word online, whatever that used to be dictionary.com, but now it's just whoever Google's giving me, you know. And that definition that they had for precept was a general rule intended to regulate behavior or thought. Right? That sounds pretty bad. And one thing that I sense, I could be wrong, but I sense, and this is partly from myself and other people I know who take up this way, that people who come to Buddhism are often skeptical of rules and regulations, and maybe even resistant to rules and regulations. So when they hear something like the precepts, there's already like some skepticism that starts, some resistance to it, which I think is partly why when we have offered a class in the precepts here at Dharma Field historically, it's the lowest enrolled class that we offer. It's just the one that nobody wants to be part of that. And I suspect it's because of that sense of rules. But one thing that I want to remind you, I've mentioned it a few times here now, the Buddha Dharma, the teaching of the awakened, are not rules. It's just pointers pointing back to reality. Now, there's a whole lot of writings in Buddhism that are rules. There are rules for living in a monastery. Those are very specific rules. And those are texts I know I have yet to really look at any length. I plan to do it at some point, but it's rules. So I'm not really looking at it. But those rules are really about the mechanics of making a monastery work for the most part. That's not what we're talking about. The Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the awakened, the teachings that point back to reality, the teachings of wisdom. These teachings aren't about rules. And that's really important for us to understand. So when we're talking about the precepts, we're not talking about rules. We're talking about this Buddha Dharma, this teaching of the awakened. So the Buddha's precepts just bring us back to what it is that's actually taking place. Now, in our class on the precepts, we look at the roots of the two parts of the word pre and sept. What are the root meanings of those words, or those parts of that word? And pre means before, sept means to take hold of or grasp. So these precepts are actually just pointers from before we grasp, before we take hold of what? Our notions about what's going on in the world. The things we live out of, that there are things, that there's a me, and that there are things in the world, and that then they should be a certain way, that they should interact a particular way. So the Buddha Dharma and these teachings that are in the precepts are teachings that come from before we grab hold of our ideas, before we grab hold of our notions of the world and self and morality. They're from the perspective of the awakened, if one could say the awakened have a perspective. And the thing about a perspective, it's automatically limited. This perspective we're talking about is one that's not limited. It doesn't have the same kind of boundaries to it that we usually think of. So those are the precepts. Yeah, Mary, you have something you want to add? Okay. There are 16 precepts that are taken up in Soto Zen. And I am going to fly through them very quickly, but I'm not going to talk about them at much length, okay? Just to give you an idea about what they are. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a particular teaching that's associated with one of the precepts, just to kind of help us to see how these precepts point to reality. And then I'll come back to our precept ceremony. So 16 precepts are taken up in Soto Zen. The first three are called taking refuge in the three treasures, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Buddha is reality. It's true nature. Dharma is the teachings of true nature. And Sangha is the community that takes up these teachings in this practice. So that's the first three precepts. That's the three treasures, taking refuge in the three treasures. The next three are the three pure precepts. And these are precepts that just point to absolute reality. And they are to live in enlightenment, to practice non-injury, to live for the benefit of all beings. There's different ways that these get worded depending on what text you're looking at. In our chant book, that's the way that they show up. So to live in enlightenment just means to practice what is wholesome. That is to practice out of the boundless whole, totality, reality, not out of our notions or ideas about what's going on. To practice non-injury, that seems like a pretty good one. That's to avoid what is unwholesome. And I don't know who put it in there. I have a feeling my husband did, but whenever I drive into my garage, there's a bumper sticker that we have on our wall of our garage. It says, "Do no harm." So to practice non-injury, to avoid what is unwholesome, and to live for the benefit of all beings. And that is to realize the true nature of reality. That reality is not about separation, about like what these characters were living in this movie that I saw, that I think we live in as well, where we're isolated and separate from one another. It's to see that there really are no boundaries, that the nature of reality is without boundary. It's totally open. And it's not all about me. So to live for the benefit of all beings. So those are the three pure precepts. And then we have the 10 grave precepts. And these precepts help us to recognize when we have strayed from the Buddha way, meaning when we have strayed from living out of this reality, when we've strayed out of totality, when we've strayed out of a reality that is an expression of absolute reality. So these are expressed as things that a follower of the way does not do. They're really just descriptions. Again, they're just to help us to see when it is that we're living out of our ideas, living out of a fragmented understanding of reality. So those 10 grave precepts are: a follower of the way does not kill. A follower of the way does not take what is not given. A follower of the way does not engage in sensual misconduct. A follower of the way does not speak deceptively. A follower of the way does not intoxicate oneself or others. A follower of the way does not slander others. A follower of the way does not praise self. A follower of the way does not possess anything selfishly. A follower of the way does not harbor ill will. A follower of the way does not abuse the three treasures. Those are the 10 grave precepts. So note that what these precepts are describing are actions, they're just actions. So a follower of the way does not speak deceptively. If we find ourselves speaking deceptively, and we do that in all kinds of ways, we might lie, we might tell exaggerations, we might flatter somebody, whatever it is we're doing, particularly if we're doing it for an ulterior motive, if we're doing it for some kind of gain. But if we're saying something that's misleading, I'd say, well, once we actually look at this, it's whether it's intentionally misleading or not, but if it's misleading, all this is telling us is that if you're speaking deceptively, we've strayed from the path. A follower of the way, one who is on this path, does not do that. So we're acting at that moment out of something, usually out of a sense of self and some way to protect that self or to please that self. But I want to point that out because, again, these are not rules telling you don't do this. It's just saying if you find yourself doing this, you're acting out of confusion at this point. And it's also not judging. So nowhere in here does it say that one who has taken what is not given needs to have the following punishments imposed upon them, right? It doesn't have that. It just tells you, pay attention to what's going on. Now, with our 10 grave precepts, when we recite them, there's actually teachings that go along with each one of them. Teachings from Bodhidharma, who's a great figure in Zen lineage. He may or may not be a historical figure, but he's an important figure in Zen lineage. He is the figure who is purported to have taken Zen from India into China. And for those who are practitioners of Zen, China is where our great Zen masters are from, right? So Zen comes from India to China through Bodhidharma. And there are teachings, Bodhidharma's teachings that go along with the precepts. And I just want to give you an example of one, just so you have a sense about what it is, and also how it helps us to see what it is that the precept is pointing to. So I decided just to look at the precept, the follower of the way does not possess anything selfishly. And I think we can understand that possessing something selfishly, where you have whatever it is, a notion of yourself, could be a thing. I think when I'm a child, and you got a toy, somebody gave you a slinky, and you don't want to give that slinky up for nothing. That's your slinky. And your brother just wants to play. No, it's my slinky. You might be playing with, I don't know, a little puppet you have or something. And your brother just wants to play with their slinky, but no, it's your slinky. So suddenly playing with that slinky becomes very important, right? But we do that with all kinds of stuff. Again, we can do that with identity too. This is mine. You can't have it. You can't play with this. So a follower of the way does not possess anything selfishly. The teaching that goes along with that, self-nature is clear and obvious. Within the suchness of all-pervading Dharma, not clinging to a single form, is called the precept of not being avaricious. I'm not going to go into the teaching in depth, except to help us to see. Again, self-nature is clear and obvious. Within the suchness of all-pervading Dharma, not clinging to a single form is called the precept of not being avaricious. So the teaching helps us to see that when we're possessing something selfishly, we're actually clinging to form. We're clinging to an idea of self. That's where the selfishly comes in. It's something that's mine. It has to do with me, with I. But also, there's a thing for us to grab hold of. So this thing is mine. My glass. Right? And there we go. We're hanging on to the idea that there's a thing. We're hanging on to the idea that there's me. We're hanging on to the idea that we can possess something. All kinds of ways that we're clinging at that point. And so the teaching that Bodhidharma offers to help illuminate that precept, that what that precept is helping us to see and not possessing anything selfishly, is to see how we're clinging to ideas we have about the nature of experience and reality. So that's our precepts. And again, the precepts aren't telling us not to do something. It'll sound like that. It'll say, I see the precepts telling me not that I should not possess anything selfishly. So then you go through your life trying to follow that rule. And then you find yourself doing it. And then what happens? Then you feel guilty or whatever. So it's not about that. It's just about helping us to see that when we do or say or believe in things that are unwholesome, that we're doing it out of ignorance. It's just not the way. It's not realizing the fact that everything we do, say, think is an expression of totality. So we take up these precepts then to live in accordance with our true nature, to live in accordance with reality, the way that it's actually showing up rather than out of our ideas of it. It's to live wholesomely, to avoid what is unwholesome, and to purify our minds. And by purifying our minds, it just means to realize the true nature that we are. So the vow then is just to turn back toward reality. That's all it is. The vow is just turning back to reality when we've overlooked it. And so in light of what I'm talking about, I invite you to take up this vow, to take up the precepts, to follow the Buddha way, and this one I'm going to risk, to be a Buddhist. And then that one I'm a little hesitant to say, because when we hear an ist, we know that's a problem. At least I hope we recognize that. When we have an ism, or somebody is an ist, of this ist, of that ist, now we've got identities, we've got ideas, we've got ways that we can grab hold of, that we think things should be this way and not that way. This way is better. You know, when I was first taking up this practice, and you'd hear Steve is very clear about that. He calls himself Buddhish, just to try to be light in a touch when you follow this way. Don't grab hold of that and be a Buddhist. And yet I would find that when I would encounter other practices, when I first took this practice up, that didn't look like mine, ooh, a little pot would be boiling inside of me, being like, oh, they're not doing that right. That's not the way you do it. I remember having the audacity. I can't even, this is so like me that I can't even believe I did this. If that makes any sense. But I was at a wedding that had traditional Vietnamese components to it. And they had a whole, it was like a wall basically, that was for ancestors, to venerate ancestors, and they were doing things to honor the ancestors that were there. And I was telling people, that's not Buddhism. I don't know what that is, but that's not Buddhism. So there you go. There's that little thing, bubble them up. That's not what we're talking about. So taking up this vow, taking up these precepts, being a Buddhist, really, if you think about it, the spirit of these teachings is not to be that Buddhist, is not to be the kind of person that grabs a hold of an identity. It's to open up from it. So why not commit to that? And when we don't want to be an ist, we don't want to be make that commitment, then it could be out of the spirit of these teachings that we're very wary of clinging to something. But it could also be, and I am very guilty of this, an act of ego, where you go, yeah, I don't subscribe to any particular philosophy. I am my own boss. I am just me. And so I am not going to commit to anything. And I say that, but it's really common. Again, I'd say people I've seen who are attracted to Buddhism, there's a degree to that. Maybe not quite expressed that way, but we know. You could tell. Are you doing this? Are you saying, I don't do that because you've got a sense of who you are and you want to be free and unfettered? And is it because I don't want to be chained down? I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of that. but what's actually taking place? Are you like, I taught a class in Milwaukee, a freshman composition class, and we were doing a unit. I was an English instructor, and we were doing a unit on advertising and how we are swayed by advertising. And my students just flat out said, nope, not me. Advertising doesn't affect me in any way whatsoever. I don't do what advertisements tell me. I don't listen to, hey, I've been there. I used to tell my teachers the same thing. So they were saying that, and I just said, okay, let me get this straight. Am I to understand that what you're telling me is that every choice that you make is your unique individual choice, and you've made this on your own? I mean, we can already see the problem with this, but think about how often you might do this, right? So many students go, yep, I don't, nothing impinges on my decisions on what I do. And it didn't take me long to realize that every student in that class is wearing blue jeans. So I just said, okay, how many of you are wearing blue jeans today? And they all raised their hand. And I said, so what I'm expected to believe is that somehow each individual one of you decided without any other kind of cultural force that you were going to wear blue jeans, and you just happen to all wear them today. Right? So I think it was a little eye-opening for them, but it's something that can be eye-opening for all of us. And that gets back to my invitation for you to commit to this way of life. I'm not saying do it. I'm not trying to pressure you to do it. I'm just inviting you to do it, to think about it. And in doing that, I'd invite you just to look at your own heart. Is this something that seems right for you or not right for you? And you'll know in your heart whether or not you're ready to commit. I can't really explain it when I think about when I took up the precepts. And Peter, you were in my precept class. I just, it was funny, I was going to give this talk, and on Facebook, of all things, a memory from Peter Wilson popped up, and it was you sharing our picture. And we had a good class. We had a lot of people whose faces I recognized who practiced here for many years. So you'll know in your heart. When I took up the precepts, I can't give you there was no logical reason why I did it. It just felt like the right thing to do. I just knew in my heart that this seemed right. I know that when I first encountered these teachings, I was fairly late in the game. I wasn't looking at this stuff or for it or thinking about it when I was young. It just wasn't. I thought about a lot of stuff, and I'd run across Buddhism at some point, and it just seemed crazy to me, so I didn't give it. I looked at it and I went, no, that's not for me. So when I actually encountered these teachings, they really spoke to me. I can't even tell you. Spoke might be the wrong way. I felt like a tuning fork. I was just like, it just made sense. This is the first thing I have read in a long time that makes sense. And then when I came here and eventually started practicing and studying, that feeling did not go away, that what I was encountering really made sense. And I'm not saying that there weren't moments when I said, what am I doing? I set my first session, one of our retreats, and I think I was only, probably at lunch the first day. So this is a day that starts at 5:30 in the morning, goes till 9 o'clock at night. And then there are 2 days, the next day didn't go as late, but still basically 2 days like this. And at lunch that first day, I remember going, I am not going to be able to make it for even another couple hours. And I have to do this till tomorrow, past where I'm at right now. What am I doing? And so it's not that those questions don't arise, but I just trusted that what we were doing was, I don't even want to say, I didn't have an idea. I really didn't know what I thought it was. I just trusted that this was something to do. And so rather than leave, which I was trying to come up with all kinds of excuses, how do I get out of here? What lie can I tell them That's going to make me look okay to get the heck out of here. So it's not that I didn't have those feelings, but overall, just practice made sense to me. It spoke to me. It spoke in my heart. And so that's what led me to take up the precepts, to go to the precept ordination. It's eventually what led me to take up ordination, first lay ordination and then priest ordination. Because I knew in my heart, just was moved to do it. This is what I need to do. So again, I'm inviting you to take up the precepts, but I'm also asking you to do it only if it feels right for you, to look at your heart and ask yourself if this is something that makes sense to you, and to vow to do it, to make that commitment, to realize if you start to resist at that point, to just sort of look at that. I'm not saying it's wrong to resist. I'm just saying, look at that. See what it is. Is that coming from ego? Or is that coming from some sense you have that, I don't know, you're being asked to do something that seems problematic, right? If you are interested in taking up the precepts here at Dharma Field, please either talk to me after the talk today or send a letter, email to the office. We are going to open up the Precept Ceremony. This is important to our online community members as well as local participants. So the ceremony itself will be hybrid, and we will include both local and distant practitioners in our ceremony. So if you are interested, again, just either talk to me after the talk or contact us at the office by sending us an email. If you have not taken the Precepts class at Dharma Field, we're going to offer that Precepts class on Wednesday evenings preceding the Precept Ceremony this year. So if you've already taken the Precept class and you want to take it again, be my guest. Like I said, we rarely have people take it in the first place. So if you want to take it again, I invite you to. I think it's a great class.
Who's teaching it?
Well, I think I will be teaching it. I'm not certain of it. We'll be talking to some people about this, but I think I will. That's my plan. When Steve taught it last year, if you had the fortune to be in that class, you saw how rich these teachings are, the precepts. It was a tremendous class. And I will do my best to at least get within 300 yards of it. But it was really a great class. If you took Steve's class last spring, that will count. If you've taken the precepts class at all, then you can go ahead and take up the precepts. If you haven't, again, you will want to register for the class. We'll be offering this spring on Wednesday evenings. And if you've been through the precept ceremony before, but you would like to renew your vows, I invite you to do that as well. I can't say, why you would or why you wouldn't do it, but if you're so moved to do the precepts again, I invite you to do it. If you're already a regular practitioner, perhaps you've taken the vow to practice, you're interested in ordaining, your heart's telling you to commit to that level, you can talk to me about that as well. So I feel like I took us on a wild trip here this morning. So I'm going to end it there and just see if people have questions or comments. Yeah. So Peter was just pointing out, again, the richness of the teachings that go along with the precepts as well, and how rich that is, and was saying that taking up the precepts again is certainly not harmful, as you say, but yeah, those I do try to bring those up in my talks from time to time. I haven't gone through the 10 of them. That would probably take a while, because they're pretty rich. But I do try to incorporate them in talks, because I agree with you. There is something in those precepts, and by the way, they're in our chant book, which is available online. It's on PDF form, and you can read through them. And you may need a little bit of help just kind of figuring out exactly what it is they're pointing out. But they're still there. They're still clear enough that what Peter's talking about, that kind of that singing quality that they have, that's still there. Yeah. So Peter was saying that they cut through common sense, and that having some question and answer with them is helpful because they really do kind of go against the flow of common sense. And that's where Peter, I would say, yeah, you're right. I mean, so reading them in the chant book, you still will probably have questions, but that's where one-on-one meetings with teachers are helpful. If you're reading something and you don't really quite get it, we have Dokusan here at Dharma Field, both in person on Sunday mornings and then virtually. Right now, it's virtually when you arrange it with a teacher, but that seems to not be working. So we'll probably be changing that to a particular time and day that we have virtual Dokusan as well. But just know, currently, we have virtual Dokusan, and it was set up to be very flexible for our distant practitioners, especially those who live at time zones where for us, an evening class is in the evening, but for them, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, to be able to come up with times that are a little better for everyone. And for those of you who are distant, if you have suggestions about days and or times that would work for you, unfortunately, Sunday mornings don't work. So I think that was a good time for everyone because you're coming to this talk and you do Dokusan right before that. It makes sense. That's why we have it here on Sunday mornings. But our teachers are here sitting, so they can't necessarily get to a computer to be able to do online Dokusan. So that's why we don't do online Dokusan on Sunday mornings. So, but you're right. So having that give and take is important, but just know that that is available through Dokusan as well as in talks and classes. Any other comments or questions? Thank you.